I'm going to start with a quote that I pulled off your website from one of my dear friends and your Chief Scientific Officer, Dr. Kaushik Ram, about InTruth. So he says, InTruth is not just decoding emotion. We are translating the subconscious language of the body into science. In a world racing towards artificial augmentation, we offer a different path, conscious evolution. What's he talking about here?
What Kaushik is referring to here is that emotion is this autonomic signal that is faster than the speed of language, and yet we're constantly dependent on our ability to articulate our feelings, to feel emotionally understood, and that there's a different way of looking at it.
Okay. What do you think that different way is?
What we're building.
Yeah.
Yeah, to actually get a system of translation happening from the nervous system to be able to translate the signal of emotional state and actually have that be made visible. For the first time, we're going to be able to see something that historically has been kind of felt and sensed, but not really tangible. We're making that tangible. Yeah.
Yes, I find your work and what you're doing super fascinating, right? And I think you touched on about the speed of language and the speed of emotion. The speed of emotion is so much faster, right? Mm-hmm. And you never really understand how fast that is, or what the emotions are that you're feeling until you're, often after you've experienced the emotion, like when you're in the thick of it, right?
That's right.
Have you got any, like from the research you've been doing, the sort of tangible data around that speed, like how quickly that sort of happens, like what we're experiencing it in?
Emotion's happening every 200 milliseconds, yeah. So that's following the temporal model of emotion. Every 200 milliseconds we'll have an emotion signal. But if you think about sort of how long it would take to formulate an answer to how are you feeling, you're probably looking at, 3 to 5 seconds. So you might say, I'm feeling happy, but in actual fact, you've experienced 50 plus emotions by the time you formulate that subjective understanding of what's really going on.
Yeah.
And that's the brain's way of trying to kind of synthesize and simplify something very complex, which we wouldn't be able to otherwise delineate. Otherwise it'd just be too overwhelming.
So what inspired you to create InTruth?
Really, it was a lifelong quest to solve the same problem, but I wanted to do that in a way that could truly transform a system, or the system, in a way that was accessible and scalable. Those things were really important to me. And looking back at my journey as an entrepreneur, there was always this, continued fight for scale. Like my first company was a nonprofit that worked in mental health, and I was specifically looking at preventative and early intervention within the mental health context, which 15 years ago was kind of a very emergent space. There were not a lot of people working in that space. It was efforts were almost exclusively focused on the pointy end of crisis intervention, right, waiting till someone had a mental illness before anything was done. And I was delivering frameworks to often rural and regional communities, but not exclusively, but predominantly. That really centered around the principles of emotional intelligence and conflict resolution, to see if building the emotional literacy of rural communities in particular could have effects on things like suicide rates, mental health outcomes, engagement in school, development of economic opportunity, all the things that we know are important to develop kind of healthy community infrastructure. And of course, there were powerful correlations, right? So I'd say I was quite a trailblazer in that space, and that's what eventually led me to advocacy, and then eventually to serve as a federal commissioner in mental health, looking at how we could redirect budget into those spaces of preventative mental health, which is becoming a growing conversation even today. So then I had this kind of unique juxtaposition of an experience where I had a lot of grassroots impact through my organization at the time, and then I had a lot of decision-making power in my role as commissioner, or at least influence around the priorities within mental health. But there was this big disconnect where you had people at the top level of politics having power but not a lot of insight, and the people on the ground having a lot of insight but no power. And I wanted to build something that solved both of those things, something that was hyper-personalised but also infinitely scalable. And, obviously a lot happened in between, but it was the iterative thinking that led me to technology being the best solution.
Yep. And at the time, you had direct influence to like the PM, is that right? Was it Malcolm Turnbull government when you were in that role? Or was that before you were in that not-for-profit?
Tony Abbott was the Prime Minister when I took that, when I did my first term, and then that changed to Malcolm Turnbull. So as a commissioner, you serve in a bipartisan advisory role. It's not contingent. It's not an elected role. You're chosen by the portfolio that you serve under. So mental health at the time did sit under Tony Abbott's portfolio because it was seen as a cross-portfolio issue. It was seen as health, housing and education. Yeah. And then that was later moved to health, which at the time the health minister was Greg Hunt, and that was under the Turnbull government. Oh, yeah. I saw all those changes, which is really interesting. I saw probably 2 or 3 10-year plans get drafted and thrown out, and I saw just the inefficiency that comes with government. They're not innovators, they're bureaucrats. The entrepreneur in me would be pained at this, seeing where $30 billion a year was going and recognizing even putting, 1% of that in the hands of innovators would just give you such a greater ROI. But those systems don't blend often. And if you look at the trends, it's usually innovators that will lead the charge, and then government will have to yield to that charge. We're seeing it in AI, right? So that's a classic example. But healthcare innovation, no different. That didn't happen within the government sector. It happened in the private sector. It went through processes of approvals, and then government, acknowledged different innovations across healthcare in due course. And seeing that, I realised that to have an impact on the world in 1,000 years' time, I was better off sitting in the entrepreneur seat. Yeah, right. Yeah, I feel like just listening to you explain that now, you kind of like peeled the curtain back of what happens behind the scenes of the government at the government level of change, and how maybe decisions that are outside of hands can just throw out 10 years worth of work or future vision and stuff like that. And a lot of it's ego, and it's not kind of possible, I think, for a single person to retain true empathy around decisions that are being made that have the potential to impact tens of millions or hundreds of millions of people. And to me, that was really problematic too, like the power concentration. And this happens in tech, as we know. Yeah. But, I think about the way we're designing our technology, at least, to actively try to solve for that. Because I think systems of the future need to put power closest to the people power effects. We need decentralized power structures. And the risk that we're seeing right now is the intensification of centralized power structures. And that just wasn't what I believed a good future was for me, for my future children, for my future grandchildren. That's not the world I wanted them to inherit. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And then the pathway that you chose from getting out of the not-for-profit business and then into being an entrepreneur, what sort of sparked that? Like, how did you make that sort of transition? And I don't know your background too well, but the whole technology space, like being the drive, that how did you sort of go from one leap to the other and sort of spark that interest there? I mean, building a non-profit, you're still an entrepreneur, right? The only difference is you're not driving shareholder dividends. You're investing that money back into the cause, which at the time was mental health. But building the business structures and all of that, I was learning those skills from day dot, building that company. So, I will say tech is still, a pretty significant leap from the businesses that I had run previously. But again, it just came down to my desire for scale. I felt too often I was at the core of the change, like it was dependent on my time and not an independent system that could live beyond me. And that's what I wanted to create. So I really just use first principles thinking. You know, what am I actually doing when I'm working within these communities? What am I trying to influence when I'm advocating politically? You know, I've written a couple of books, and I do a lot of speaking and host events around the philosophies and principles that I would write about. And of course, there's a level of scale in that. Like, someone can read my book without me being there.
Yeah.
But it just isn't enough to really change how we fundamentally operate as a system. You know, very few authors, for example, have changed the way that we exist, with the exception of, you know, Socrates. Like, you know, so I could see that there was a limit. And I guess because of my mindset, I didn't want to feel like I was working towards something that would cap my capacity for impact.
Yeah, right. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, it's funny, and a lot of those authors probably don't reap those level of impact until after they've passed away as well. And
often, yeah.
Yeah. Kind of like really good artists, I guess. Yeah, super fascinating. And then that sort of scale and drive of where you're trying to, so you just see no bounds to the limit of the problem you're trying to solve.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's an infrastructure. You know, once you make emotion data visible, it does have an infinite power to affect decision making on every level. Like, imagine you had a global data set of the world's emotional data and how global decisions, political decisions, changes in the world, changes in the stock market, how that was actually affecting humans on an emotional level at scale. That is, you know, incredibly rich data that we've never had access to.
When you put it that way, it sounds like super fascinating but also terrifying at the same time, because I would immediately think of, and one of the questions is like, what if this sort of power were to fall into the wrong hands? So yeah. Do you ever think about that?
Of course, this is why we're building InTruth, so that the ownership is with the user.
Right.
You know, and that's what we can eventually look at aggregate, you know, data sets and demographics within those data sets. But my belief is that your identity data as Sam is your business and your discretion, you know, and that's how it should be. And it's a very disruptive business model, because a lot of tech companies, you know, even the ones that have great products, the real value of the company is in that centralized data and who they're selling that data to and what they're doing with that data. So it's lofty in the sense that, you know, InTruth could be $1 trillion company if we were to compromise on our promise of data sovereignty. So my challenge is, how can you make it $1 trillion company anyway? Yeah, and that sounds like such a interesting challenge. Have you figured that out yet? Yeah, well, I mean, the path to $1 billion is pretty clear. I think there's going to be learnings that take us beyond that. You know, I think we're living through a time now, for the first time in history, that building $1 trillion company is even possible. Like, you know, you've got companies like NVIDIA basically leading that charge, and they have a complete monopoly on supply. So, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting times for sure. Yeah, I saw it. Remember in your keynote that you gave at the Startup to Summit event that we were at, and then you described the idea of the business model of the data being in the hands of the customer. You really sort of spelled it out to me, and it was kind of like a light bulb moment of like, wow, that's, you know, as a customer and user, and, you know, really aware of data privacy as well. Like, it, you know, would be, you know, sound very appealing to me to not only to give that away, not give it away, but to know it's like in safe hands, particularly when it comes to something like emotions, and, you know, because it's a whole spectrum of things that I don't even understand, right, of what I feel. So, yeah, that was, and I think I raised a question to you of like that whole idea of the moat, because no technology company does that. Yeah, they will use it for profit, right? Yeah. Well, you can still, it's not necessarily about forgoing the idea that our infrastructure could be profitable. So if you look at different models, for example, like the one I presented at that summit, it's actually about being able to build an infrastructure that is so user-friendly that you could open source it and actually have others build upon it, so that your core infrastructure becomes more valuable. Right. And it's sort of incrementally increasing the accuracy of our model as well. These are some great solutions where the core infrastructure becomes incredibly valuable in and of its own right, but through aggregate learnings and not through specific user data. And the user can, give us their data if they want to, but it will always it will be their discretion as to whether or not they do that.
Yeah. In that talk, you gave the use case of like how your product could really beneficial people of domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you see, with that as a use case, where do you see the impact of InTruth really helping people the most?
Yeah, well, we're starting to see it come to life now, which is, amazing. We're past that chasm now of revenue generation, so it's been amazing to see InTruth in the world.
Yeah.
So there's a few use cases I could speak about, but the domestic violence or family violence space is one that is obviously very powerful because of how much of an issue it is, especially in a country like Australia. The agencies we work with say, reports will state it's 1 in 4 families, but they believe it's closer to 1 in 3 families. So
yeah, right. Wow.
like that is a considerable statistic that almost 35% of families in Australia are likely dealing with some form of domestic violence. That's horrific.
Yeah, it's huge.
So the utility for a technology like InTruth, there's a few different ways it could be applied. The ways that we're discussing this with a partner at the moment is to put InTruth, which for your listeners' sake is an emotion biotechnology that reads emotion through wearable devices, putting that on a perpetrator of violence so that they can be aware, as well as potentially the case manager that is looking after them, of risk factors, looking at when violence is high risk or likely to happen, looking at the patterns that occur before violent episodes, being able to look at the proactive nature that individuals taking to de-escalate situations. So if you can see that emotions are escalating, imagine then also being able to see through something like geolocation that they proactively went for a walk and they de-escalated that that emotional state rather than moving further into it and then eventually doing something that puts someone else in harm's way. You can start to build a confidence and a safety ultimately that would allow families to stay together, which, from what we've listened to in some of our partnerships is one of the main goals, with a few exceptions, of course, because outcomes for families that separate and kids that get taken away are statistically, a lot worse than a family that can actually work through those patterns and get to the other side.
Yeah.
But the challenge is safety, right? So before a solution like InTruth, the best solution was to call the police. And it's the number one reason police get called, by the way, which I think is crazy.
Domestic violence?
And not just in low socioeconomic areas, like very expensive areas of Sydney, for example. It's just as frequent as low socioeconomic areas.
Wow.
So it's not discriminating based on socioeconomics, which I think says a lot. And when we've really listened to these clients too, the triggers are so interesting to me. Like often it's inflated utility bills, added financial stress, which we're obviously seeing a lot more of now, that are just tipping people over the edge, and they don't have the emotional regulation ability to handle, and I'm not making any excuse for violent behavior at all, just to be very clear. But if you actually look at the data, these are the things that are triggering these kinds of episodes over and over again. And we know this because the first line of call that is having violence reported is often utility companies, where the woman is calling the company and saying, please, can you put the bill into my name and not send it to my partner, because if he sees this, it will likely trigger a violent episode.
No way.
And
wow.
They're then obviously obligated to make a report based on this admission, and this is so common. So there's a huge need for a tool like InTruth that just puts some of that visibility and power back in the hands of the people it's impacting. In an ideal world, we wouldn't need something like that, right? But this is the world that we're living in. And then we have a lot of other, use cases that are far wide-reaching. We just started a pilot actually with rural farmers. So they're using InTruth through a great organization that does like retreats and personal development and mental health development for farmers.
Yep.
But obviously farmers' risk of suicide is very high. So having a tool like InTruth to help them build emotional literacy, help them share that data maybe with people they care about when they don't know how to explain what's really going on, we hope is going to, make the world of difference. And then, enterprise is something that we're tackling at the moment, which I'm quite excited about. That's more geared towards how the data can be used to support effective collaboration, to look at team cohesion, to help build teams that are, complementary. And this consistent pain point that we hear from clients around, it's just so hard to get objective, useful data on this thing that we know is so defining to individual and group level outcomes, being emotion. Most people are trying to capture this data through, a culture amp survey or some kind of subjective report where it's very unreliable, sporadic data where you're getting a survey every 6 months. So it's one data point. You're probably not being honest in that survey anyway. Imagine replacing that with a data point every 200 milliseconds per person.
Yeah, immediately when you sort of raise those things, some things came to mind, but like with the technology teams that we work with, and then seeing how people feel. One of a great thing that one of my CTOs had for his team was he didn't make it mandatory, but developers to develop a diary of like how you're feeling every day, and it's just like a simple like happy face, sad face. Then like all these neutrals, like 5 different faces you can think, and then you look at trends and patterns, and if there was ever a downtime, it's like, all right, what was that about? What was it? Culturally, was it not like, was it about the business or how you're feeling? But that single use data point is like every day, and that was the closest he could get to it without it impacting their day to day.
Yeah, and it just gets annoying to have to report
exactly.
on that.
Yeah. Unless you're like super like into it, it does get. I don't keep a diary. But when I do journal, I do find it very therapeutic to do so. But to do it every day, mandatory, I probably wouldn't do it at all.
And it's unreliable data, even if someone did it.
I think that's the main thing, is it is unreliable. By the time you're doing it, the emotion's gone, the feeling's gone.
Yeah, the example I give, like part of our roadmap is to achieve software as a medical device status with the FDA. And that will position InTruth as, a med tech, basically a software as a med tech. And I want emotion positioned as an actual biomarker, that is something that could be recognized within healthcare, no different to blood pressure. And the example I give when I'm talking about this is, imagine going to the doctor and the doctor saying, Sam, what do you think your blood pressure is? And you say, I don't know, I think it's like 200 on 150. And the doctor says, oh, that's pretty high.
If I knew what that meant,
like, let's put you on some medication, and then that was the process. We'd obviously think that was absurd. We'd use a blood pressure tool and would get the measurement properly and would make discretionary decisions based on the true data. But if you compare that process to how we treat and medicate mental health, that's exactly what we do. We give you a survey and say, have you been stressed in the last 7 days? And
what sort of question is that as well? Is it's like, of course
it's so ambiguous. And the fact that from whatever the answers to that is, you can be put on, very addictive, lifelong antipsychotics or antidepressants is just insane. So we're in desperate need for hard data. Mental health is the real epidemic I think we're experiencing as a Western world. For a whole multitude of different reasons, and that's only going to accelerate, I think, with the rise of artificial intelligence and the crisis of purpose that will likely come from that. And connection. We need solutions, because data helps inform proper decision making, and with the data that we have available right now in these arenas, we're just shooting blanks.
Wow. All right. And I think like what I see as well from what you've described, the ability to harness these emotions, do you think we like is it just a data point as a tool for what InTruth does, or do you think as that medical device that you talk about, will it get to the point where you could be like, all right, I want to be in an optimal state to be at work, or I want to be in an optimal state, like I talk about I'm big passionate advocate of like flow state and like how to get into it. Do you see InTruth being a tool to optimize as opposed to just report or collect data?
Of course, I think it'll be a sort of a natural utility once you have our data in context and you can see kind of critical drivers, for example, which is one of the metrics we give our users, where you can see, every time you did these things or you were in these places, you went from frustrated to in a state of flow, To be able to see those patterns obviously allows you to take more control. The step beyond that, if we really want to go out there, one of the things I was talking a lot about in Dubai with prospects is the uprising of wellness property development in those regions, and being able to integrate a tool like InTruth into the actual smart system of the home. So the user experience would be something like being able to be at home and say, I want to optimize for creativity, and you select that. Obviously, InTruth knows that the state in which you need to be in order to feel creative, the exact breath rate, how the environmental factors are influencing that. It could start changing the lighting, it could change the sound, it could change the aroma, the music, all these kinds of things to help optimize whatever state that you were wanting to experience.
No way, that's fascinating. Yeah. Right. So so plug it into like a smart home that would be able to do that. Yeah.
That's one of the ways.
Yeah, that's cool. Have you been playing around with that yet?
Well, we definitely know it's possible. Yeah. Like all the tech is there, right? So we haven't started building anything, but it was definitely a big conversation that came up again and again, because it's a huge industry. I think it'll probably be the next kind of wave of property development globally.
You could do that with workplaces as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I mean, I think that the entry will probably be these big kind of multi-million-dollar developments that are being developed for wellness. Yep. And it would probably be like, you check in rather than getting a hotel room key card, you get like this ring and like, here you go, and that unlocks your room. It's also synced to the apartment, and it starts to, automate everything on your behalf, and that'll be the future of wellness tourism, I think.
And that's the InTruth tool, the ring? Like
my InTruth right now is connected to this Garmin watch, but this is also a PPG sensor, so we could easily offer InTruth on a ring. All right,
cool. I remember when I first met you, you said PPG. Not everyone is going to know what that means.
It's like an impossible word to say. It's like, it's literally so hard to say. Yeah. It's like very convoluted and scientific. But the green light sensor that you see on these devices, most wearable devices, the flashing green light, that is a PPG sensor. Same with most smart rings. They use a signal called PPG. So we're taking the raw PPG data called beat-to-beat interval, and we're basically mining for the information in that data and teaching that data how to read emotional state, basically. Wow.
Yeah. And how many emotions do we have?
If you look at kind of beyond language, at a, I guess, neuroscientific frame, emotions understood as the intersection of valence and arousal, which means arousal stress. So you imagine it on an XY axis. Yeah. This is stress and this is valence. So this would be low stress, high stress, and this would be negative valence to positive valence.
Right, okay.
Or, positive to negative feeling. And then when those data points come together, and there could be literally thousands of little data points where that could cross over on a valence arousal graph, that's an emotion signal. Yep. But then what you see in our data is there'll be clusters of valence arousal, like clusters on the valence arousal graph that will start to like saturate or concentrate, and you'd sort of start to see, okay, that's kind of a distinct emotion that someone's probably recognizing and feeling, because there's a concentration of those autonomic signals, because they are happening so fast, right? So what is emotion? I think that question, there's scientific answers that are actually quite different and nuanced compared to what we understand emotion to be culturally. And I think that's kind of a part of our job, is to help educate people around that, because most of us think emotion and feeling are the same thing. And it's not that they're unrelated, it's just that feeling is your mind catching up with something that's happening a lot faster in the body. The body has a lot more intelligence in some ways than what our conscious mind, well, in many ways, than what our conscious mind can can really have a grip of, because it would just be too much information to be cognizant of at all times. So it has to happen in this just like breathing, autonomic way.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, cool.
But it's still intelligence, and it's actually driving 80% of our behavior.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Makes a lot of sense. And I just want to touch on, so the emotion and the feeling is like the feeling is like the language of what we interpret the emotion to be. Is that the body's way, this like conscious way of interpreting it? But that
the conscious recognition, and what one of those things is obviously language. Yeah. But it could also just be the awareness of what you're starting to feel. Yeah. So there's a stimulus, then there's the automatic response to that stimulus, and then the brain, and your awareness will slowly catch up with the impact of that stimulus, and then it will move, into a mood if you don't shake it, or eventually a state of being. So if someone has anxiety disorder, for example, their state, their baseline state is, anxious, which is a lot of unprocessed emotions that haven't been processed over time, and it's created this state. And I give a talk on this, actually. Like, a lot of entrepreneurs and change makers are trying to change the state of something, right? That's what they say. We want to change the state of a nation, the state of an industry, the state of how we live. But what is state? Well, state is an aggregation of unprocessed emotions, actually. And yet we don't look at that as a theory of change very, very frequently. And so what we end up with are kind of strategies that impose change rather than that coming from the inside out. And if you look to more of a spiritualist view, this is a message that's been said for eons, that we have to change from within. It's not until we achieve inner peace and balance and restoration that the world will be simultaneously balanced and restored and peaceful. I just feel it's our job as a team to put the actual data and science to that.
It's really deep.
Yeah, quite deep.
And yeah, wow. You kind of just reminded me of like the Michael Jackson song "Man in the Mirror." Yeah.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. But it's so true though. And if you're looking at that, the emotional state. So instead of like changing from the outside in, the inside out, and that will encourage real change as well, instead of like just slapping a band over some sort of change, because you're looking at the root cause of a problem, right? Yeah,
well, this is the thing, this is going back to where we started the conversation. You can impose a law, for example, like you could say it's illegal to, I don't know, be racist, but it doesn't stop people from being racist. Maybe they don't enact it, and there's a goodness that comes with that for sure. But how much more powerful is it if that person who is racist actually had a true inner transformation through overcoming, the fears and the insecurities and the judgments inside of them that were causing that type of projection on someone from a different culture. Like, to me, that is what we should be aiming for as a benchmark of true healing. Yeah,
fantastic. Wow, man, we keep talking about this for hours, I reckon. It's pretty fascinating stuff. I did have a couple of questions about like your team and just the energy that I'm getting off you in terms of like what you're, obviously it's like a big problem you're trying to solve here. So when it comes down to your team, your founding team, who you're looking forward to enforce that change, what do you look for?
Yeah, that's a recruitment question. Love it. I think intelligence and self-awareness personally would be at the top of my list. And I don't do all the recruiting, in the team. So in some instances, I'd let our senior leaders do that. But if it was me making the decision, what's the level of intelligence? And I don't just mean IQ. I mean social emotional intelligence, like true self-awareness, the propensity to self-reflect, without that being debilitating, because you also want a team member that can make a decision and own that decision. I look for someone that is able to explain exactly why they made the decision they made, and to have a very strong logical rationale, because to me that shows self-awareness. And for someone who really either is or is excelling or desires to be the best at what they do.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. It's like conscious around that as well, I think, as well.
Conscientiousness, and hard work. I think, we've kind of, we don't value that anymore as much as we should. Like someone that's really just willing to put in the hours. As soon as I have a team member that's starting to kind of nitpick over, working overtime or this or that, I just don't think that they're the cultural fit. We've got a mission, and time is of the essence. So if you're going to be debating about those kind of smaller details, it's probably not the right company for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
In, setting up InTruth and running it, what do you think has been the biggest setback that you've encountered, and how have you overcome it?
Yeah, it's a bit of a tough question. I think, look, keeping on the thread of recruitment, probably the wrong hires.
Yeah. Yeah, really? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a biotech company, right? Like, it's expensive. The burn is very high, month on month. And if you don't have excellence in the right roles, and if you don't have the right people working on the right things, even if we lose 2 months, it's cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yep.
So there's a real seriousness to that. It's not the kind of environment where you can sit around and twiddle your thumbs and, wait for a performance review in 6 months. It's just not going to fly. So I've made mistakes with the wrong hires more than once, and that's definitely been the thing that's cost us the most.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Fair enough.
And didn't fire fast enough.
Yeah.
Probably hired too quickly and didn't fire fast enough.
Yeah, so it's that age-old saying of take a while to hire, but then quick to fire if you can.
Yeah, and in the very beginning, like after I did my first cap raise in 2021, was inexperienced, and I thought, let's bring on a whole bunch of executive types, and that was the totally wrong move at that time.
Really?
Yeah, I should have gone for junior executors and put an advisory board together around the subject matter expertise in the early days that we needed, and just hired internally, the leanest version of what was required to get a really solid and robust MVP. So I'd do a lot different now if I went back. Yeah.
Yeah. How? I mean, in hindsight, that sounds like the play-by-play of what you should do, right? But I think like when you're doing it in the thick of it, it's probably a bit of a different thing. Well,
the journey of a founder is crazy. You go from like having nothing but an idea to having millions of dollars. Yeah. And I'm a solo founder. Like I didn't have a co-founder to talk through those ideas with. It was me. And you have to figure it out. And you make a lot of mistakes on the way, and some of those mistakes are really expensive.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But I've been blessed with great investors that I think see the vision, and they know kind of it's a drop in the ocean compared to what this will be. What it could be. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. That's awesome. Who do you see InTruth impacting the most? My hope is that it will impact the individuals the most. Because if it impacts the individuals the most, it will impact the world the most. Yeah. If we're giving a great user experience to, say, an employer, but not to the employees, to me that's a fail. Sure. I want every person that uses InTruth to love it, and for it to bring true transformation to their life. Yeah, fantastic. And that sort of resonates with that whole. I love to use a surfing terminology here of groundswell, so coming from the bottom up. Yeah. Yeah. Or the inside out. The inside out. I love that as well. Yeah. And that's how you solve the true problem, what we were chatting about before, right? Yeah. Yeah. All right. I asked this before, is like, are you wary about this tech ever being harnessed by people for bad reasons or ill intentions? And you said like all the time. What do you think? Have you got any safeguards around that? Like, and that was, sorry, you did answer that before around the people are the safeguards, so end user really being the safeguard and protect that data. Yeah, we'll inevitably have competitors though that try to do what we're doing, and they may not have the same ethos that we have. So that keeps me awake at night. We're actually creating a documentary about this at the moment. Oh, no way. Working title is The Empathy Revolution, but I think that having a really powerful storytelling component to what we're doing is going to serve this well, because it gives us an opportunity to expose, the power of what this could be, but also the dystopian path that it could be if that power fell into the wrong hands. And like we're the underdogs for sure.
Yeah, right.
I think we're going to win, but it's my job to think that we're going to win, and I'm crazy enough to think that. But yeah, I mean, there are interests that are very, very powerful that will want this kind of data, and there's always the risk that it will be sold to the highest bidder.
Yeah, okay. And that's, what I envision something as soon as it gets to that tipping inflection point.
People need to not be passive, and I think this is true, in general and for all areas of social change, that nothing is guaranteed. Like it's the consumer backing an opt-in, and you vote with your dollars, you vote with the brands that you support, and the little decisions that you make today, especially now in the tech landscape that we're existing in, will change the world in 1,000 years. And that's more responsibility than most people are willing to think about every day. But it does matter. And if you have kids, I would seriously think about it, in terms of the world that they're inheriting. Because do you want corporations to have access to the most sensitive, vulnerable parts of them?
And they have it all the time now, don't they?
It would get worse. It'll get worse with biotechnologies.
Yeah.
Of course. Like at the moment, it's predictive engines, and we've seen the impact of that. Echo chambers, algorithms, recommendation engines. That's bad enough.
Yeah.
Even cognitive deterioration from LLMs.
Yeah.
But the step beyond this is full-time physiological access to you in all moments, in context to your life. Like that is unparalleled amounts of power. You could persuade or nudge someone to do anything with that kind of data.
And I feel like there's sort of two things, like a two-pronged attack here. Like you just said, the cognitive dissonance, almost a destruction of it, like with LMMs. And I remember you did a LinkedIn post about George Orwell, about a quote from 1984, about when you take the ability to write, you're basically destroying a language and the power to have that ability to revolt or to think.
That's right.
To think probably,
you can't even, how can you fight if you're not even able to formulate the context in which you're living? Yeah,
and just listening to one of Sam Altman's recent pods he did, he was saying that the most common use case for ChatGPT at the moment is for health reasons.
Yeah, mental health therapy.
Yeah, mental health reasons. Yeah, exactly.
It's terrifying.
Now it's terrifying.
Did you watch his interview with Tucker Carlson?
No, I haven't seen Tucker Carlson one. No.
Yeah, I mean, it just struck so much. Tucker just asked him straight out. Do you believe in God? Do you have a spiritual authority? You're building a technology that has the power to be one of the most powerful technologies that alters the course of human history. Yeah. Who's your spiritual authority? And he just can't answer the question. And to me, that's terrifying. I'm not saying every person needs to have a belief in God, of course not. But I do think that if you are going to inherit substantial amounts of power, we should choose people that feel a sense of spiritual duty and responsibility within that power. And it's very dangerous if that's not there. That's my personal opinion, because it will breed, pretty psychopathic behaviors, I think, without that.
Yeah, wow. yeah. But even though, so it doesn't have to be God, it's just a spiritual authority, that the sense of a greater good. Is that what you're trying to... Sense of a greater good
and sense of some form of divine justice.
Divine justice.
That if you exploit your power for greed or for self-gratification... there's a consequence. I think it's very important for someone who's that powerful to have a real sense of that in what they're doing.
Yeah. No, I agree with that as well. Because then just leads to that psychopathic behaviour and can tend to, the greed will just keep going. I think that's sort of I just haven't seen or witnessed a company that has scaled so quickly and impacted so many people so fast. Even with the rise of Facebook, it was a much more gradual thing.
Totally.
Yeah. And the impact and then you were just touching on that about the fear of you've got people treating ChatGPT as a psychologist or a psychiatrist in the palm of their hand, when it's definitely not.
No. And we've seen the effects of that, right? There's been terrible stories that have been
suicides.
Yeah, and it's also a testament to the fact that we are forgetting how to actually trust and be vulnerable and connect in the real world.
Yeah, with everyday people.
With real people, your community should be your mental health support first and foremost. That's always been my message, right? I've advocated for that for 15 years. Like, we can have all the sophisticated systems, including, an abundance of clinical psychologists, but if we don't have mental health support in our own family units, in our own relationships, in our friendships, it's going to fall flat.
Yeah. I feel like a lot of the use cases for mental health fall down when those social connections, are raised when those social connections fall down. Particularly, I've seen it firsthand with people in my community. Like, I grew up in Nowra down the south coast. We had a big problem with male suicide. Like, people three.
I'm sorry, it's so hard.
Yeah, three guys, and I used to skateboard a lot, so we were kind of like the social outcasts. Couldn't play any other sports, so we skateboarded and discovered our own creativity through that tool. But yeah, three of the guys that we were skateboarding with committed suicide during that time, and you never know what's going on. There's probably a lot of things going on, like a lot of things you can't explain. But I think the ability to communicate what they were probably going through. If that happened there, if they had those tools or just the social surroundings to be able to do that might have been a different thing. I don't know.
Well, it's both of those things, right? You need the ability to communicate in whatever form, and you need someone who's willing to listen. Yeah. And someone who's listening, who's equipped, and this is my problem with things like Are You OK Day. I think it's, it was a great step forward, but, the reality is, if it's Are You OK Day and you ask your mate if they're okay and they turn around and say, actually, no, I'm thinking of taking my life, how equipped is that person to actually handle that and not make someone feel even more isolated through their reaction? So building emotional capacity and emotional fluency across the board is the solution, starting with the self. Like, we're not breeding a world and a society of people that truly love who they are, not in a, I don't mean that in a self-obsessed way, but when you have someone who is self-secure, who has a deep acceptance for who they are, who truly loves themselves, so is able to know who they are, know what's right and wrong for them, express that without any kind of anxiety or overbearingness. That is an amazing foundation to be able to then support others around you, because you're not in need. Whereas we have a whole society of people, for the most part, that are just trying to get their needs met because our social and emotional needs are not met. So you're dealing with a society of people that are very emotionally volatile, who are often taking from each other, and sometimes masking that as giving, but they're not fulfilled within themselves, and this is never going to lead us in a good direction. I want us to get to a place as humanity where we are all self-secure enough to ask bigger questions. My fear is we're asking bigger questions, but we do not have the emotional or spiritual maturity to be asking those questions. We haven't sorted ourselves out. Yeah. We need to reach a place of relative enlightenment, I believe, before we start to ask about superintelligence. Like that has to be secondary to our own evolution. Otherwise, it will be the demise of humanity, and it'll be a potential extinction event. And I think that's the risk that is alive right now in the world.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, fascinating stuff. I think a lot of things that you touched on is like, I think as you grow up and become an adult, you sort of go through that insightful journey or inflection of yourself and of belonging into like who you are as a person and that acceptance. And yeah, if as a society you don't go through that and you're looking for, or even as a person, for your needs to be met elsewhere, it's kind of like done with, it leads to what you were talking about before of, you're doing it with ulterior motives, right? You're
Yeah.
not doing it from a place of like genuine careness or empathy for someone else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. And it's no one's fault. You know, it's we haven't been taught these things for the most part, or we haven't had it role modeled. And that's a shame. And it's a lot to face yourself. Like if you really strip it all back, it's hard to look at the parts of yourself that are not really that likable, you know.
Yeah, I think what, you know, if I've listened correctly to you now, and we've used this word, you said empathy, I've just said it then, and I think like if I understand truly what InTruth does, it kind of like visualizes an empathy, like for someone on the end user, because you can see their emotions and and then what they're going through and visual, and they could actually have that sort of introspection as well. And it's such a powerful tool if you truly understand what empathy actually is.
That's right.
And the reason why I say that is I listened to a TED talk of, and I forget who the person who gave it to was, but he was a black guy in the US, and he experienced a hell of a lot of racism growing up, and his goal, mission in life was to convert grand masters in the Ku Klux Klan, and he basically but the reason he did it, and he's done it, he's got a closet at home of just like their robes, so he derobes them. That was his big thing. And he did it, the only way he could do it that he uncovered was through empathy. Yep. And understanding how that they got to the point of so much hatred.
What their story was.
Yeah, what their story was. And it's one of the most insightful TED Talks because of the power of that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, you know, to be what society would perceive as a victim, and to have grace and forgiveness and humility in that is, you know, one of the highest spiritual principles that's discussed in most religions. You know, it is at the core of what Christianity truly is, and these are the things that will liberate us, right? But we don't have many examples of it, unfortunately. But it's what we need. Like that's true leadership. That's actual leadership. You know, and it's the opposite of what we see leaders emulating on a global stage. It's self-orientation, self-protection, showing no grace. You know, driving polarization and opposition. That's not leadership. No.
Yeah. And I feel like that the message of what, you know, religion, the spirituality behind it, of what it really is trying to convey, whatever religion that is often, you talked about polarization just then, is polarized to deter from like the real reason of them bringing people together.
Yeah, well, it's become an institution for the most part, and it's been used, you know, via the human ego to enact control and power. It's like the classic playbook, right? Yeah. But if you if you can go back to what a lot of these texts are really saying, you know, the point I give on this topic quite often is a lot of us are looking for kind of spiritual or philosophical principles to live by, because a lot of us feel that sense of hopelessness or the lack of direction, right? And it's these principles and values that really are meant to guide our journey in that way that is missing from a modern day context. Those things are really fundamental to human development. And things like religion, you know, those principles, like if you go back to, say, the Ten Commandments, that stood the test of time for thousands of years. Like thousands of years. The Ten Commandments are as true today as they were thousands of years ago. It's not to say every single thing about the way Christianity, as an example, has been institutionalized, or every single thing that the Bible says we should take literally. But if you can appreciate it, you know, in its core, to me, we're far better off following a set of guidelines for life that have stood the test of time, more than, you know, the latest quote unquote Instagram gurus, you know, 7 steps to happiness. The Greeks had a saying which I love, which is the truth is ultimately defensible. The truth is the only thing that is ultimately defensible. Truth is the only thing that's ultimately defensible, yeah. And what their meaning is, you can antagonize and debate and antagonize some more ideas, And it'll only be the truth that you can defend over and over and over again. So if you look at scriptures that have stood the test of time, the truth is ultimately defensible. Like if we could disprove the value of a lot of those principles, we would have already by now, because it's been thousands of years.
Yeah.
So can't we use that as a foundation and then progress beyond that? Whereas I think postmodernist society is trying to get us to abandon tradition in pursuit of postmodernist values. But what that means is no foundation and a constant quest for some kind of identity, which I think is why we're seeing so many people that have confused identities in the world right now.
Avoid an emptiness that follows with that as well, because you don't have that foundation.
And we don't know who we are in that.
Yeah. Nicole, I feel like we can keep talking for ages. I'm loving
great
this.
chat.
Yeah. All right, quick fire questions that I sort of like to leave this with.
Great.
Leave these podcasts with is what's your favourite book that you think you've ever read?
Top two would probably be Conversations with God and The 48 Laws of Power.
Oh, yeah? Robert Greene? Yeah, I read that. That's good. I like that.
Yep.
You know it's banned in jail?
What's that?
In America, they banned that book in jail.
Oh, really? Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, it's so true. Yeah. Again, we could do a whole podcast just on that. But the principle that I love that he puts forward is you're never not playing a game of power. And those that try to be meek in that are some of the most manipulative people.
Yeah.
And it just kind of, it points you to recognize that regardless of whatever you think, it is important to own your power and to understand that we live in a context of power dynamics. Yeah,
and there's always a power dynamic. Yeah. That's very true.
You're better off doing that consciously.
I think he did the quote. It was one, and I think it might not be from that book, but I think he was talking about it was like any interaction that you have with one person is a relationship but as soon as there's one other person, it's politics. And that's where that power comes. Yeah, as soon as you're with that. Yeah.
True.
Conversations with God. That was another one.
Neil Donald Walsh,
Neil Donald Walsh. I don't know that one.
Yeah, there's a few of them. But basically it's him looking for, I guess, guidance and writing to God. And then in his testimony, God starts to actually speak to him. And he dictates that into a book. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That reminds me of a book called Isha, I think. Okay. Yeah, it's a similar thing where a guy, he talks to an ape.
Right.
Yeah, and it's ape is God. This God. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. If you were to name one person who was the inspiration to where you are today, who would it be?
I'd say the first on the list would be my school principal that kind of showed me what empathy truly was when I was dealing with an eating disorder in high school. He was the first person to have that really tough conversation with me that changed my perception of what leadership is. And it changed my life. It put me on a different path.
It's so powerful when you have that one person in your life. Yeah. Yeah. And teachers, whether it be a principal or teacher, they can quite often be that person for a lot of kids. Yeah. 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 It's very important. Okay, cool. What habits would you say you do that contribute to who you are?
Habits.
Or behaviours, yeah. Habits is usually a good thing. Do you have any habits?
Yeah, I mean, we all have habits, right?
That contribute to your success.
Yeah, like I travel a lot, but I'm still very routine, so that would be top of the list. I think the thing that probably trumps all of it, though, to be honest, is I have a fundamental worldview that circulates around the idea of self-mastery. So taking responsibility for absolutely everything that happens to me, whether it was my fault or not, just puts me in a position of strength. Yep. Even though, it can be hard to, there's always a part of us that wants to defer, blame or whatever, when you feel something's not fair or unjustified but yeah, I kind of take a position of I'm the creator of my reality. Everything that's happening to me is because of me. Yeah. And that just allows me to be in the driver's seat, I guess, and I think that mindset, for me at least, tends to, lean me towards more positive habits and behaviors. Like if you recognize that you are the conscious creator of your reality, there's no longer an excuse to train badly, eat badly, have bad relationships around you. There's too much responsibility and kind of self-agency and self-love at stake to justify things that aren't good for you.
Yeah, love that. Nicole Gibson, thank you very much for coming on.
Sam. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for coming on Scallop Soundbites. It's been great. Thank you.
Thanks.